The crowd's angry voices echoed through the dusty streets of Millbrook on that scorching summer afternoon in 1989. In the center of it all stood a 70-year-old man, chained to a rusted telephone pole like an animal. Blood dripped from his weathered face onto his torn work shirt. His frail hands, covered in cuts and bruises, hung limp at his sides. "Monster," someone screamed. "He doesn't deserve to live," another voice shouted. But what the mob didn't know, what nobody knew that day, was that the real monster was standing right there among them, watching with cold, calculating eyes as an innocent man took the fall for his unspeakable crime. This is the story of how a town's rage nearly killed the wrong man, and how one boy's determination to find the truth would change everything. It was June 15, 1989. A Tuesday morning that started like any other in the small town of Millbrook, Pennsylvania. But by noon, everything had changed. 15-year-old Sarah Mitchell hadn't come home from school. Her mother, Linda, had called the police at 4 p.m. when Sarah missed dinner, something she never did. By 6 p.m., half the town was searching. They found her body at 8:30 p.m., hidden behind the old abandoned factory near Route 9. She'd been raped and murdered. Her torn school uniform lay scattered in the dirt. Her lunchbox sat unopened beside her. The town of Millbrook had never seen such evil. Henry Walsh was 70 years old and looked even older. Decades of construction work had bent his spine and gnarled his hands. His face was a map of wrinkles, each line telling a story of hard labor under the sun. He moved slowly, carefully, like a man whose body had given everything it had to give. Henry lived alone in a tiny apartment above Murphy's hardware store on Main Street. His wife had died 5 years earlier from cancer. His son had moved to Chicago in 1975 and rarely called. Henry's only companion was his routine: wake at 5 a.m., work until 6 p.m., eat a simple dinner, sleep by 8 p.m. He was a tired man. A forgotten man. A man nobody really noticed anymore. On the evening of June 15, Henry had been working late, repairing the fence behind the factory, the same factory where Sarah's body was found. He'd been there alone, doing the job nobody else wanted to do, for $15 an hour under the table. When Sheriff Tom Bradley arrived at Henry's apartment at 10 p.m., Henry was already asleep. The loud banging on his door startled him awake. "Henry Walsh? We need you to come with us," the sheriff said, his voice hard as stone. What's going on?" Henry asked, confused and frightened. "A girl was murdered tonight. Behind the factory. Where you were working." Henry's blood ran cold. "I didn't see anything. I left around 6:30. I didn't." "Save it for the station," Bradley interrupted. At the police station, they questioned Henry for 3 hours. "Where were you? What did you see? Why were you really there?" The questions came like bullets. "I was just fixing the fence," Henry kept saying, his voice weak and trembling. "I didn't see anyone. I didn't do anything. Please, you have to believe me." But they didn't believe him. A witness, Marcus Green, a 30-year-old construction foreman, had come forward. Marcus told police he'd seen Henry near the factory at 8 p.m., around the time Sarah had been killed. He said Henry had blood on his hands and looked suspicious and nervous. He was washing his hands at the water pump, Marcus told the police. "Acting real strange. When he saw me, he ran." It was a lie. Every word of it. But nobody knew that yet. By midnight, word had spread through Millbrook like wildfire. The old man. The tired worker. Henry Walsh. He killed Sarah Mitchell. By dawn, an angry crowd had gathered outside the police station. They wanted justice. They wanted revenge. They wanted blood. Sheriff Bradley, fearing the mob would storm the station, made a terrible decision. He brought Henry outside. "Let them see you're holding him," Deputy Miller had suggested. Let them see justice is being done. But the moment Henry stepped outside in handcuffs, the crowd exploded. They rushed him. 50, maybe 60 people. Men, women, even teenagers. Their faces twisted with rage and grief. Murderer. Baby killer. You monster. They dragged Henry from the sheriff's grip. Someone produced a thick chain, the kind used to secure tractors and heavy machinery. They wrapped it around Henry's frail body and locked it to the telephone pole in the town square. Let everyone see what you are, a man screamed, spitting in Henry's face. Then the beating began. Fists. Kicks. Rocks. Someone threw a bottle that shattered against Henry's head, opening a deep gash above his left eye. Blood poured down his face, mixing with his tears. Please, Henry whispered through broken lips. I didn't do anything. But his voice was drowned out by the roar of the mob. They beat him for 20 minutes before Sheriff Bradley and his deputies could pull them back. By then, Henry's face was unrecognizable. His shirt was torn and soaked with blood. His hands, still chained, were swollen and purple. His frail body hung against the pole like a rag doll. That's enough. Bradley shouted, firing his gun into the air. Get back. All of you. Henry could barely lift his head. Blood filled his mouth. His ribs screamed with every shallow breath. Through his swollen eyes, he looked at the faces surrounding him, faces he'd known for years, people he'd worked for, neighbors he'd waved to every morning. Now they all wanted him dead. I'm innocent, he whispered, but nobody heard him. Standing at the back of the crowd, watching it all unfold, was Marcus Green. A slight smile played at the corners of his mouth. His plan had worked perfectly. 800 miles away in Chicago, Illinois, 12-year-old Tommy Walsh was eating breakfast when the phone rang. It was 7 a.m. on June 16. Tommy's father, Robert Walsh, Henry's son, answered. Tommy watched his father's face turn pale, then red, then pale again. What? No, that's impossible. Dad would never. Are you sure? Jesus Christ. When Robert hung up, he sat down heavily at the kitchen table, his hands shaking. Tommy, he said quietly, your grandfather's been arrested. They're saying he hurt someone. A young girl. Tommy's spoon clattered into his bowl. Grandpa Henry? That's crazy. He wouldn't hurt anyone. I know, son. I know. But there was doubt in Robert's voice. He hadn't seen his father in years. People change. Maybe the old man had finally snapped. Tommy didn't believe it. Not for a second. We have to go help him, Tommy insisted. Tommy, it's 800 miles away. And if he did it? He didn't. Tommy shouted. I know he didn't. Tommy had spent every summer until he was 9 with his grandfather in Millbrook. He remembered those days clearly, the early morning fishing trips, the quiet dinners, the way Grandpa Henry would read him stories at bedtime. Henry Walsh was the gentlest man Tommy had ever known. A man like that doesn't just become a monster. After hours of pleading, Robert finally agreed. They packed a bag and started driving. They arrived in Millbrook 36 hours later, exhausted and afraid. What they found was worse than anything they'd imagined. Henry was in the hospital, barely conscious. His face was a mass of bruises and cuts. Both eyes were swollen shut. 3 ribs were broken. His left hand was fractured in 2 places. Dad, Robert whispered when he saw him, tears streaming down his face. Oh God, Dad, what did they do to you? Henry's lips moved slightly. Robert? That you? Yeah, Dad. It's me. I'm here. We're here. Tommy stepped forward, his small hand gently touching his grandfather's arm. Grandpa Henry? It's Tommy. Henry's swollen eyes tried to open. Tommy, my boy, you came. Of course I came, Grandpa. And I know you didn't do it. I know you're innocent. A tear rolled down Henry's bruised cheek. They all think, everyone thinks. I don't care what they think, Tommy said firmly. I'm going to prove you didn't do it. Henry squeezed Tommy's hand with what little strength he had left. You always believed in people, Tommy. Just like your grandmother. Tommy stood up straighter. He was only 12 years old, but in that moment, he made a decision that would change everything. I'm going to find out who really did this, Grandpa. I promise. While Robert stayed with Henry at the hospital, Tommy started asking questions. The police wouldn't talk to a kid, but Tommy was smart. He'd watched enough detective shows to know that criminals always make mistakes. He started at the factory where Sarah's body had been found. The fence was still there, half repaired, exactly as Grandpa Henry had left it. Tommy examined the area carefully. There were boot prints in the dirt, large ones, much bigger than his grandfather's worn work shoes. He found something else too, a cigarette but near the water pump. Marlboro Reds. Tommy's grandfather didn't smoke. Never had. Tommy carefully wrapped the cigarette butt in a napkin and put it in his pocket. Tommy learned that Marcus Green lived in a trailer park on the edge of town. He rode his bicycle there the next morning. Marcus was outside, working on his truck. He was a big man, maybe 6'2", with thick arms covered in tattoos. He looked up when Tommy approached. What do you want, kid? I'm Henry Walsh's grandson, Tommy said, trying to keep his voice steady. Marcus's face darkened. That old pervert? You should be ashamed to be related to him. He didn't do it, Tommy said. I saw him there, Marcus shot back. Saw him with blood on his hands, acting all guilty. What time exactly did you see him? Marcus hesitated for just a fraction of a second. Around 8 p.m. Like I told the cops. And what were you doing at the factory at 8 p.m.? Dropping off some tools. Not that it's any of your business, kid. Tommy looked at Marcus's boots. They were work boots. Large. Size 12, maybe 13. The same size as the prints he'd found at the factory. You smoke Marlboro Reds? Tommy asked suddenly. Marcus's eyes narrowed. What? I asked if you smoke Marlboro Reds. I found a cigarette butt at the factory. Near where you said you saw my grandfather. Lots of people smoke Marlboros, kid. Now get lost before I call your daddy. But Tommy had seen something in Marcus's eyes. Fear. Just for a moment, but it was there. That evening, Tommy sat in his grandfather's tiny apartment, spreading out everything he'd learned on the kitchen table. The police report said Sarah had been killed between 7:30 and 8:30 p.m. Grandpa Henry had left the factory at 6:30 p.m. Multiple people at Murphy's Hardware had seen him come home at 6:45 p.m. So how could Henry have been at the factory at 8 p.m., as Marcus claimed? Tommy called the hardware store owner, Mr. Murphy. Hi, Mr. Murphy. This is Tommy Walsh, Henry's grandson. Can I ask you something? Did my grandfather seem strange or nervous when he came home on the 15th? Henry? No, son. He came home like always. Washed up, bought a sandwich from the deli counter, went upstairs. Same as every day. Quiet as a mouse, that man. What time was that? About 6:45, maybe 6:50. I remember because I locked up at 7, and Henry was already upstairs by then. Tommy thanked Mr. Murphy and hung up. If Grandpa Henry was in his apartment at 7 p.m., he couldn't have been at the factory at 8 p.m. Not with his bad leg and slow walking pace. It would take him at least 45 minutes to walk back to the factory. Marcus Green was lying. But why? Tommy spent the next 3 days digging deeper. He talked to Sarah Mitchell's friends at school. He learned that Sarah had been walking home from tutoring that night, taking a shortcut behind the factory, a route only locals knew about. He talked to workers at the construction site where Marcus Green worked. One older worker, Joe Martinez, pulled Tommy aside. "You're asking about Marcus?" Joe said quietly. "Kid, be careful around him. There's something not right about that guy." "What do you mean?" "He's got a temper. A bad one. And I've seen the way he looks at young girls. Makes my skin crawl." "Has he ever done anything?" Joe hesitated. "There were rumors a few years back. When he worked in Ohio. Something about a girl. But nothing was ever proven, and he moved here." Tommy's heart raced. "Do you know what town in Ohio?" "Somewhere near Cleveland, I think. Lakewood, maybe?" That night, Tommy convinced his father to help him call the Lakewood, Ohio Police Department. At first, the officer on the line didn't want to share information with a civilian. But when Robert explained the situation, an innocent man beaten and jailed, a real killer possibly walking free, the officer relented. "We did have an incident here in 1985, the officer said. Girl named Amy Patterson, 16 years old. She was assaulted but survived. She identified a man named Marcus Green. But her family dropped the charges. They'd been threatened, we suspected. Green left town before we could build a stronger case." Tommy's hands shook as he wrote down every word. Marcus Green had done this before. Tommy knew the police wouldn't listen to a 12-year-old kid. He needed real evidence. He spent days retracing every step. He went back to the factory a dozen times, looking for anything he might have missed. He talked to everyone who might have seen something. Finally, he found her, Mrs. Eleanor Chen, an elderly woman who lived in a house overlooking the factory grounds. Nobody had talked to her because she kept to herself and didn't speak much English. Tommy knocked on her door and, through patient conversation and hand gestures, learned something incredible. Mrs. Chen had been sitting on her back porch the evening Sarah was killed. She'd seen a man behind the factory around 8 p.m. A big man with dark hair, wearing a construction company shirt. "Not old man," she insisted, gesturing. "Big man. Strong. Young. Was he smoking?" Tommy asked, miming the gesture. Mrs. Chen nodded vigorously. "Yes. Smoking." Tommy's heart pounded. "Did you see what he did?" Mrs. Chen's face grew sad. She nodded slowly, tears forming in her eyes. Through broken English and gestures, she explained that she'd seen the man with a young girl. She'd seen him hurt her. She'd been too frightened to come forward, afraid the man would hurt her too. "Can you identify him?" Tommy asked. Mrs. Chen nodded. "I remember face." Tommy gathered everything, the cigarette butt, Mrs. Chen's eyewitness account, the timeline proving Henry couldn't have been there, Marcus's history in Ohio, the boot prints matching Marcus's size, Joe Martinez's testimony about Marcus's behavior. He typed it all up on his father's laptop, creating a complete report. Then he and Robert took it to Sheriff Bradley. At first, Bradley was dismissive. "Kid, I appreciate your loyalty to your grandfather, but we have our witness." "Your witness is the real killer," Tommy interrupted. "And I can prove it." For the next hour, Tommy laid out his case. Every piece of evidence. Every timeline inconsistency. Every witness statement. Sheriff Bradley's face grew paler with each revelation. "Jesus Christ," he finally whispered. "We got the wrong man." Within hours, Sheriff Bradley had assembled his team. They obtained a warrant for Marcus Green's arrest and a search warrant for his trailer. When they arrived at 6 a.m. the next morning, Marcus was eating breakfast, confident and relaxed. He'd gotten away with it. Or so he thought. "Marcus Green, you're under arrest for the rape and murder of Sarah Mitchell," Bradley announced. Marcus's coffee cup dropped from his hand, shattering on the floor. "What? No. I told you, it was the old man. I saw him." "We know you lied, Marcus," Deputy Miller said, pulling Marcus's arms behind his back. "We know everything." In Marcus's trailer, they found the evidence that sealed his fate: Sarah Mitchell's broken necklace hidden in a drawer, clothes with bloodstains that would later match Sarah's DNA, a journal with disturbing writings about young girls, photos of Sarah taken from a distance. He'd been stalking her. Marcus Green had made the fatal mistake of keeping trophies. Under interrogation, Marcus finally broke. It took 6 hours, but eventually, the whole story spilled out. He'd been obsessed with Sarah for months. He'd followed her, learned her routines, waited for his chance. On June 15th, he'd seen her taking the shortcut behind the factory. He'd attacked her. And when he was finished with his unspeakable crime, he'd panicked. He'd seen the old man's tools, seen that Henry Walsh worked there. It had been easy to frame a tired, weak, forgotten old man. Who would believe Henry over him? "I knew nobody would care about some old guy," Marcus said bitterly. "Nobody even notices people like him." But Marcus had been wrong. Someone had noticed. Someone had cared. A 12-year-old boy who loved his grandfather. When they came to tell Henry Walsh he was free, he could barely believe it. "You're saying, I can go?" Henry whispered from his hospital bed. "Yes, Mr. Walsh," Sheriff Bradley said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm so sorry. We failed you. We nearly let a mob kill an innocent man." Henry turned his head to look at Tommy, who stood beside his hospital bed, tears streaming down his face. "You did this," Henry said. "Tommy, you saved me." "I told you I'd prove you didn't do it, Grandpa," Tommy said, his voice breaking. "I told you I'd find the truth." Robert Walsh wrapped his arms around his son and his father, 3 generations finally reunited. Word spread through Millbrook faster than the original accusation had. The old man was innocent. Marcus Green was the real monster. They'd beaten an innocent man. They'd nearly killed him. The guilt was crushing. When Henry was finally released from the hospital 2 weeks later, still bandaged and limping, half the town showed up outside his apartment. Mr. Murphy was there, tears in his eyes. "Henry, I'm so sorry. I should have spoken up. I should have told them you were home." Joe Martinez was there. "Mr. Walsh, I knew something was wrong with Green. I should have said something sooner." The mother of Sarah Mitchell was there too. Linda Mitchell walked through the crowd and stood before Henry. Her eyes were red from weeks of crying. "Mr. Walsh," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "What they did to you, what we all did to you, I have no words. My baby is gone, and in our grief, we hurt another innocent person. Can you ever forgive us?" Henry, despite everything he'd endured, despite the scars that would never fully heal, reached out and took her hand. "Mrs. Mitchell," he said gently. "You lost your daughter. I can't imagine that pain. What happened to me, it wasn't your fault. We all just wanted justice for Sarah. We just wanted someone to blame. But it should have been the right someone," Linda said, sobbing. The crowd fell silent. Henry looked around at all the faces that had screamed for his blood, hands that had beaten him, voices that had called him a monster. "I forgive you," Henry said simply. "All of you. Because holding on to hate, that just makes more monsters. And we've had enough of those." The town of Millbrook raised money for Henry, enough to cover his medical bills and then some. They threw him a dinner at the community center. They honored him. But more than that, they learned. They learned that rage can blind you to the truth. That accusations aren't the same as facts. That mob justice is no justice at all. That even the weakest, most forgotten among us deserves dignity and protection. Tommy Walsh became a hero in Millbrook. The boy who wouldn't give up. The boy who proved that the truth matters more than the crowd. When it came time to go back to Chicago, Henry stood at the bus station with Robert and Tommy. "You could come with us, Dad," Robert said. "Start over somewhere new." Henry smiled, his face still marked with fading bruises. "This is my home, son. These are my people. They made a mistake, but so did I. I forgot that we're all connected. That we all matter." He turned to Tommy and knelt down, ignoring the pain in his ribs. "Tommy, my boy. You gave me something I thought I'd lost forever." "What's that, Grandpa?" "Hope," Henry said. "Hope that even in the darkest times, even when the whole world turns against you, there's always someone who will fight for the truth. You be that person, Tommy. Always be that person." Tommy hugged his grandfather tight. "I will, Grandpa. I promise." Marcus Green was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In his cell, he would have decades to think about the lives he'd destroyed and the innocent man he'd tried to murder by proxy. Henry Walsh lived another 15 years, passing peacefully in his sleep at the age of 85. At his funeral, the entire town of Millbrook showed up to pay their respects. They'd spent those 15 years making sure Henry knew he was valued, loved, and would never be forgotten. Tommy Walsh grew up to become a criminal defense attorney, specializing in cases of wrongful accusation. He dedicated his career to making sure what happened to his grandfather never happened to anyone else. And in the Millbrook town square, where Henry had once been chained and beaten, they erected a small plaque. It read, "In memory of the day we forgot our humanity, and in honor of Henry Walsh, who reminded us to find it again. May we never forget that every person deserves justice, dignity, and the presumption of innocence." Below that, in smaller letters, "And to Tommy Walsh, who showed us that one voice of truth is louder than 1,000 voices of rage." The chains that bound Henry Walsh that terrible day in June 1989 were made of steel. But the chains of false accusation, mob mentality, and rush to judgment? Those were far stronger, and far more dangerous. It took the faith of one 12-year-old boy to break them. Because sometimes, the smallest voice carries the greatest truth. And sometimes, the most forgotten among us are exactly the ones who deserve to be remembered.